Well, that's quite a loaded confession, Lando. And honestly, it really could help him out. I'm really glad that he said it. And the timing couldn't be any more poignant because this is Monza, where we really saw things get awkward, especially after last year's Hungarian Grand Prix. You know the one. Remember when papaya rules collapsed at the second chicane? A year later, Norris has dropped this confession, and suddenly his conduct makes more sense. Especially when you compare it with Alonso last weekend out. Especially when you consider that Fernando Alonso at the Dutch Grand Prix last weekend managed to out himself. I didn't see that one coming. I didn't think that could be out frustrated. Norris saying this during the typical media day preparations before the race weekend proper, which may become a thing of the past if Stefano Domenicali gets his way, but that was from my video from yesterday, so go and take a look at that after this one. In this though, Norris was quizzed about how he feels being 34 points behind Piastri with only 9 races left to go. And he managed to confess a couple of home truths that might really help him out in the long run and really go against the grain about what people have been saying about him, because quite honestly, I feel like Lando's being overhated at this point. Here is what Lando had to say for your consideration right here. As much as I always hated using experience as an excuse or reasoning for things, you end up going, yeah, well, I just learned about this because of experience, and that is my advantage over Oscar, but he certainly doesn't lack in speed, talent, ability, in any sense of the word. So, I know what I'm going up against. I'm going up against a guy who is the same speed as me and just as good as me. He's incredibly calm, he's cool. I feel like I am, but he makes me look like I'm emotional. Oh, now that is very nice to hear from Lando, really putting things into perspective, and when you actually stop to think, you go, oh yeah, he actually has a point. Oscar being as cool as an arraigned Carthaginian, that would make anyone look incredibly livid or angry or passionate. And you really can't deny with what Lando just said. Statistically speaking, yes, he has 4 more seasons of Formula 1 experience than Piastri. And it's nice to hear that he isn't just completely doing Oscar down or anything. This is something that really makes me think McLaren have really got a lid on intra-team rivalries. Especially considering that Oscar rarely flares up at anything. The only way you could really make Oscar angry is if you put him right next to an Alpine car. Yeah, his stoic attitude really puts Lando's crises of confidence into sharp relief and open to ridicule or skepticism, as you might be aware, and again, there have been far more passionate and tempestuous F1 drivers in its 75-year history. It really makes you think, and also, thanks to CodeFX for this chart, Norris isn't out of it yet. Far from it. With only 9 rounds to go, 34 points is not an insurmountable mountain to climb. In fact, it's the 3rd lowest points gap in recent times, and for perspective, the 2010 title had 4 drivers separated by fewer than 25 points with 2 races to go. In modern scoring times, even Vettel in 2012 came back from a 42-point deficit to Alonso. So, you know, the prerequisite for late-season turnarounds really does exist. We all thought that Lando might have had a snifter of a chance back when he had over 60 points over Max Verstappen, considering the fall-off of the RB20 and the rise of the MCL38. So it may just depend on constant consistency rather than late-form brilliance, and let's not forget, it will only take a DNF of Piastri, the last one he had was back in Canada 2023, his rookie year, and then it might be all play for again. It would be back down to a 9-point deficit. And you know what? I actually am really proud of Lando Norris, because he's come a long, long way since he got his very first major scalp from Piastri back in Qatar 2023. Piastri's first win of any kind, being able to outdo Lando, who had yet been able to get anything. A sprint win or a Grand Prix win, he had come close but no cigar. All of which being further exacerbated by Lando making a mistake in qualifying, because he did feel that pole was his, and quite rightly, it should have been, but it wasn't. And the best thing about this confession is that Norris is no longer dodging the emotional chestnut or anything like that. He's not saying, oh, I'm not emotional, you're being emotional. No, he's openly admitting it. So, yeah, I can be emotional. I'm not as emotional as some people can be, but you know, that is just who I am. And that is a really, really big admittance that will really go a long way. So credit where credit is due here. That is one of the main confessions. I feel like there are more than just one here. This title does work on many levels. Instead of treating emotions as a flaw, he's reframing it into something useful, both for himself and the critics. Sports psychologists often argue that reframing emotion is healthier than suppressing it, which may suggest he actually has been to see a sports psychologist in private. And in elite competition, sometimes denial leads to bottling things up and eventual explosions, whereas channeling it may sharpen focus and keep things on the level. And Norris seems to have found that sweet spot. Now, that's a big deal here. He's acknowledging that Piastri's stoicism makes him look hot-blooded, hot-headed, and really, really open to a few dents every now and again. But rather than wallow about it or just dwell on the matter, no, he's actually saying, you know what, that's just who I am, Oscar is who he is, and that's just part of the terms of engagement with our rivalry here. It's benchmarking against his toughest reference point at the moment, because last year it was Max Verstappen, and Max Verstappen right now is not in a position to be fighting for a world title here. So I do feel like that, hey, even if Lando doesn't win this year's title, he has actually been able to outshine Max Verstappen in various Grand Prix. And I know you'll be saying, well, it's got something to do with the car, but as far as Norris is concerned, it's a nice little win for him. And hey, last year's Lando would have bitten your hand off if you said, hey, just 12 months from now, you'll be actually trouncing Max Verstappen by nearly 3 figures, being only one of 2 people ahead of him, the rest behind Max in a beleaguered car. I think Lando would take that. And considering that Oscar managed to take a win from Lando Norris at the track that he won in 2024 and then got a grand slam in the process, his measured response here is actually really mature. That was only just a few days ago. You would think that Lando would be hurting and be really, really sad about it, but no. He's absolutely fine, and I'm really pleased. He's come on a long way in the last few months, ever since the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, so he really deserves some credit there. Now, this is different from using emotion as some kind of crux or weakness or excuse, or using experience as an excuse. No, what Lando is doing here, by just admitting to all of this, just getting it out in the open and saying, there, it's just the way it is. It means that he's no longer having to hide and he can be his true self, and that's the Lando Norris we are going to be seeing for the rest of his career. This is going to be the personality that will define him for the next decade plus, wherever he goes, be it McLaren or somewhere else. There are some things that Oscar Piastri, despite his absolute brilliance right now after just 50 plus Grand Prix, he simply just does not know about, and he openly admits that, yeah, okay, I got it wrong, but I'll get better next time, and more often than not, he does do better next time. So he is a man of his word. He doesn't often get grumpy to our faces. He internalizes it, or keeps it towards his private most trusted accomplices, be it Matt Webber or his girlfriend Lily. I mean, you've only got to look at this year's Silverstone Grand Prix when he was leading the field convincingly, and then after the safety car peeled away, Piastri was too heavy on the brakes, almost collected Verstappen, who had to take evasive action when he took over the job as safety car, and that misjudgment cost him dearly, the win in Lando's backyard. Just a few rounds later, around the Dutch Grand Prix, which Lando won convincingly last year and Oscar couldn't hold a candle to him, finishing in 4th, he was able to do that same thing, leading the field as a safety car, twice with no issues at all. Granted, yeah, there was rain at play here, but you still have to deal with the whole idea of margins and gaps and what have you, and Oscar showed that, yeah, he's come on a long way really quickly. So the advantage that Lando may have may get smaller and smaller, but he still has that experience edge over Oscar for the time being, and that is absolutely true. And that's a credible advantage when everything else is equal, because that is what Lando is saying. He's saying, well, as far as I'm concerned, Oscar is just as good as me. He feels like they are equal fighters in this battle at the moment, and that the only thing that Lando has is that he's been around the block a few more times, which is perfectly reasonable. Especially since McLaren are continuing their push for parity. They have got no advantages at the moment. Also, Lando's not promising to feel less or be a different person. He's going to be that same person and use those feelings as judgment instead of just wallowing in it with no conclusion, no satisfying ending. So that's good. And some of you may not want to admit it, but we have seen a difference in Lando Norris since 2023. Since the year, arguably, which he started, he would have probably felt absolutely invincible after completely trouncing the 8-time Grand Prix winner Daniel Ricciardo. And we all did not expect that to happen, but at the end of 2022, he looked absolutely bulletproof. Lando looked like a changed man. But then you fast forward from Australia 2023 to Qatar 2023, and the script had been changed completely, because at the beginning of the year, all looked good. He was the leader, he was the more experienced one, and Oscar Piastri was the rookie. Sure, he'd won a couple of titles back-to-back, that was pretty good, something that Lando did not do in Formula 3 and Formula 2. Experience and overall exposure to Formula 1 was key. And also that was the only thing that Lando could really focus on, because the MCL 60 at the beginning of that year was absolutely terrible, as we saw in Bahrain. And yes, I know that Qatar was only a sprint race, in some eyes that doesn't count, but come on, this was in Oscar's rookie year. Still a huge achievement. An achievement that he accomplished before Lando did. An achievement which could have been Lando's had he not gone wide at the last corner in qualifying prior to the race. So I just want to take you back to the quotes, the reaction of Lando after Oscar got that win, and the change in language is really, really telling here, and it just shows the progress that has been made in less than 2 years. It's something really, really impressive. So here it is, for your consideration. Ahem. I'm very happy for the team. I'm happy for Oscar. He's beat me to a win, so congrats to him. Of course, it's never the nicest feeling. It hurts me. It just hurts me that I've messed up this morning. I should be on pole and should be at least P1 or P2 yesterday for the race tomorrow. I just made too many mistakes. It just annoys me to such a high level. I try to reset and refocus and not think of it, but it's impossible for me to not think of it. Just frustrating, because it's just the shoulda, woulda, coulda stuff. I'm starting where I deserve to be because I've just done a bad job. I let myself down, so tough. But to come away with a double podium today makes it a little bit better, and therefore I'm just very happy for the team. Yeah, it's quite a raw passage in it, but hey, at least he's being honest, because it would easily be something we could have conveyed, where if he just said, "Oh, I'm really happy for Oscar, I couldn't be more pleased," we would have just thinking, "Oh, give over, he doesn't mean that." Whereas here, it's like, yeah, no, he probably means that, but some people may see that as weak. But to me, I feel that was pretty honest, but still, it's a lot more raw than it is today. He's still very emotional, but he's certainly a lot more circumspect, not quite as disparaging toward himself. And I think this will be really good for Lando's confidence in just focusing on one thing that he definitely has over Piastri, no questions asked, instead of just thinking, oh, is he still just as good as me, or is he going to be better than me? No, Lando can hold his head high and say, yes, I ultimately have more experience, and there may come a Grand Prix where it will come in clutch, as it did with the British Grand Prix this year. Oscar made a mistake, Lando capitalised on it, and McLaren saw him home. Whatever you say, whatever happens, if Lando doesn't win a title, at least he has won at least one British Grand Prix in front of the Lando stand. That is something that can never be taken away from him. That is a huge achievement and something he will be truly proud of until his dying days, many decades from now. He's basically saying, hey, Oscar's really good. I'm not going to deny that anymore, but if something crops up, I think I've got the edge. And that's a perfectly valid thought to have. And yes, okay, it might be true that he doesn't have that particular instinct that people are screaming from the rooftops that Oscar Piastri might have in spades, even though Piastri himself is a little bit dubious about the whole killer instinct vibe. And I don't think he's going to be changing Lando his ways. This is what we're going to be getting for the rest of his career, and it means that we are getting a Lando who is completely not disingenuous. And I don't think he could really do that anymore, because if he suddenly just clammed up, people would just be going, oh no, he doesn't really mean that really. Oh, that's just forced, that's staged. Somebody within the PR department told him to do that. So at this point, he may as well just be himself for the rest of his time in F1, because otherwise we wouldn't be getting the real deal. Lando's fans would be just thinking, well, he's been completely curtailed. McLaren has suppressed him. Whereas now, no, that's probably actually Lando. And I think he's now not ashamed to admit that. And what's really good is he's trying to really eschew other people's opinions, because you just got to go back to Jeddah, and that was really, really galling. You know, 10th place in Q3, crashing out like that. Then in Bahrain, he does do okay in qualifying, but then makes a mistake. He has to fight back. He doesn't get on the podium. And in both races, Oscar completely trounces him. Back then, he looked broken. You would think that he'd be broken after the Dutch Grand Prix. He did everything he could. He then missed out through a mistake that wasn't his own fault, although some people may argue that if it was a chassis issue, then Lando must have obviously done something wrong. But the fact was, though, is that all he said, the peak of his disappointment, was he just wanted to get a burger. That was it. And to be fair, I wouldn't blame him being an emotional and physical wreck around Saudi Arabia, because it would have been absolutely roasting in the media pen back then, even at night. You can also suggest a shift in security when comparing Lando's first ever admittance of Oscar being better than him on a weekend to where they are both right. Piastri pulling out the biggest gap between them in the championship thus far with 9 races to go, but again, not an impossible gap to close down. Publicly rating your teammate also as your equal is risky if you're fragile, because every bad Sunday becomes proof you were second best. But he does it anyway, and he will continue to do so. And history does point out to us quite a few times, we're talking Senna, Prost, Alonso, Hamilton, Rosberg, is that the moment things start to go south or go toxic, it usually starts when both drivers fail to give ground publicly. They don't own up to their mistakes or try and look at things from the other driver's perspective. They clam up. Right now, Norris is doing the opposite, so that might actually put away any obvious flashpoint, because we all thought that Montreal was going to be the flashpoint where Norris might have said, oh, Oscar turned into me. What was he thinking? He wouldn't have taken any responsibility. Oscar wouldn't have taken any responsibility. And then things would have been absolutely terrible for all concerned. But no, within just like 10 seconds on the radio, Lando held his hand up, said, yeah, no, that was my fault. My bad. Sorry, team. Give apologies to Oscar. And that was that, really. That could have easily been the flashpoint. It should have been in days gone by, like Spain 2016 for Hamilton Rosberg, but no. Lando's got the good measure, and he's not afraid to admit if he did something wrong. He didn't allow the pundits to try and fill in the gaps. He filled in the gaps for everyone, all concerned. Yeah, that might not exactly be sexy in terms of the headlines and talking points for all of the TV reporters, but that's just the way it is. And some might say this has come from the mindset of Andrea Stella, one who has said about communication that it has to be open at all times, and that McLaren has a very strict principle that no one person is bigger than McLaren itself, which does sound very familiar for those of you who are au fait with Stella's career, having really cut his teeth back at Ferrari, working for the likes of Schumacher and Alonso, and in fact migrating to McLaren with Alonso in the middle of the 2010s. And you just feel that work ethic, that principle has really come over. It's been migrated over from the Scuderia, and it's now really living prosperously within McLaren, and will continue to do so for a very long time, since Stella recently got a contract extension, which makes me think that the Brown-Stella partnership will endure so long as they don't become quite toxic. Yeah, that's the little burbling thing. So if they can't practice what they preach, that's when things could become toxic between the two higher-ups. Between the two drivers, though, I think everything's absolutely fine. They want to be friends. They want to be working together to give McLaren the accolade of back-to-back Constructors titles and then 1,000 points in the Constructors. So if there is any disappointment from Lando, if he doesn't win the title, then it would have been because he didn't help contribute McLaren to do something that Red Bull in 2023 could not do. And I think this was a necessary thing for Norris to do, to try and recalibrate where he thinks he is in relation to Oscar, because at the very least, they are going to be working together for at least 2 more seasons. So if McLaren hit the ground running next year and they are title contenders, that's 2 more years of them fighting for world championships. One may have the advantage this year, but then, ideally, they would just simply rewrite that, reset it, forget it, and then go again. But I don't think that it means that Lando's not learned anything at all. But he'll want to, as he put it for motorsport.com in this interview, want to win his own way. And so I won't be surprised to see more examples of Norris getting embroiled in instances which subvert expectations and disappoint many pundits. Jack Villeneuve, who would be expecting a typical response to a particular incident that they're accustomed to when times were different. And to be fair, Oscar does the same thing in his own way. He chooses to exert his full emotions behind closed doors while also accepting something happened with a modicum of annoyance or acceptance before then going, "Oh well, I'll do better next time." That's one thing you got to give McLaren credit for. They are allowing Oscar and Lando to process things at their own pace, forge their own conclusions, and also live on with papaya rules. Yeah, McLaren may be washing their hands of any responsibility should things go wrong. It's down to the drivers if they mess up, but both drivers are being given the freedom to be their own drivers. We're not seeing a situation where one driver rules the roost and then the second driver doesn't count for toffee. Both drivers count for toffee. And especially when you look back to the days of Ron Dennis and really when it got bad between Hamilton and Button, where you felt like, sure, well, they are Lewis, they are Jensen, but they were somewhat curtailed personality-wise, that they weren't able to be their true selves, which was one of the draws that Mercedes gave to Lewis. That means he could be his own person, say what he wants, dresses how he likes as he was getting into fashion, of just being a walking, talking billboard for Ron. In comparison, Oscar and Lando are totally free. Also, another sign of Lando forging his own path is that late last year, after Max had sewed things up, he talked through his season with unusual candour, agreeing with some outside critiques and yet pushing back toward others, framing last year as a big learning year, as well as stressing how much more punishing small errors are at the front, and he'd learnt how to separate online noise from the voices that truly matter, his bosses. Yeah, he was disappointed that he couldn't win against Max Verstappen, whose car was completely failing him, but he managed to learn quite a few things, and there have been moments where Lando has made mistakes. He has not denied them, but he is certainly a lot more composed than he was in 2024, that's for darn sure. Look, the picture is simple. Norris wears his heart on his sleeve in public, and that is not going to change. He has made that absolutely, apparently, abundantly clear to all concerned. He is not going to be changing his mood for anyone. He's not going to be cosplaying toughness and going, "Grr, I'm Lando Norris, grr." He's not going to be emulating Max Verstappen's Foxtrot Oscar attitude of just taking no prisoners and then eating them for lunch. Yeah, that doesn't make Lando a saint, but it doesn't mean that he is just fragile and incredibly lazy or completely weary. No. He's just being honest. And there are people out there who are lauded for saying what they think and just saying it as it is. Well, Lando should be congratulated for doing the same thing and being honest, just telling it like it is. So you might be wondering, what is the Lando Norris confession? Well, in truth, I think it's the Lando Norris confessions. 3 of them to be precise. First, that Oscar Piastri is his equal on speed and probably calmer under fire. Second, that his own edge is experience rather than some mystical killer instinct. And third, that he can look emotional next to Oscar, and that this is not a flaw to hide from, but more of just a signal in management. He's not just a poor boy, he'd need no sympathy. Easy come, easy go. Again, he is just telling what the terms of engagement between the two men will be, for this year, next year, and the year after that, at the very least. And if that is able to happen, that McLaren can manifest 3 good seasons at the very least with these two men, and things don't go south, then that'll be a huge achievement. McLaren will have come a long, long way since the late 80s and the late 2000s when things got really bad for them. Historically so. In short, Lando is not just relying on self-deprecation, he's just taking responsibility now. And it also really matters because he's saying right now that he does value his teammate. He's not dismissing Oscar Piastri at all. And that's really telling after nearly 3 seasons now of reality check after reality check from the Daniel Ricciardo days. Saying your closest benchmark is the same speed as me and just as good as me gives Piastri full credit while raising his own standard, Lando's. Most drivers tend to avoid doing that because it narrows the escape routes if they lose. And we hear that time and time again from pundits that you're not supposed to think that way or it's the ultimate weakness, but Lando does it anyway. He doesn't give a hoot. He's now become the definite article of Lando Norris. And if you've been spending the last couple of years or so saying that Lando is just an absolutely weak guy, no questions asked, I feel like there have been things behind the scenes in the last few months especially, just trying to carve out Lando Norris into something where, yes, he can be himself, but that shouldn't be some kind of crux or some kind of issue that will be the undoing of him in any battle with Piastri or anyone else. It means that he won't be some kind of cookie cutter, that he's just trying to ape Oscar Piastri or mimic Max Verstappen, because he's going to do neither of those things. What he's confessing to right now is that, yeah, Oscar's just as good as I am. I have a viable edge which is quantifiable, and I am not going to be just copying Max Verstappen just because I battled him. Admittedly, I have been critical of Lando not being tough enough in the past, but you know what? Okay, fine, Lando. You do you. You do you. And you should do you, because I think that this video will really tickle your fancy, and I'll see you over there, okay? I've just got to go and change my clothes.